Good morning.
Good morning.
So apparently, Derek went to my office and grabbed one of the books off the shelf since he knew I was preaching today, and it's How to Prepare Bible Messages. So if you let me take a brief moment. There's only 311 pages here, so we should be able to get through this. Oh, he said I could take my time. Thank you. I appreciate that. No, it's good to have fun, joke with one another. We're here for the word, not for me. I get that. Sorry, you're stuck with me, though. For today, at least. If you would, take your Bibles, please, and go to the book of 1 Kings chapter 19. 1 Kings chapter 19. We're actually picking up on a little series that we started months ago, and if you weren't here for that, that's totally fine, because this is only the third message in that, and it's also, I think, the last one in it. So when Pastor Jeff had to step out a few times because of pain previously, we had looked at Elijah's life and really dealing with times where you're in the desert, when you're in drought, when you're parched, when there's nowhere to go. And today we're still in the desert. We're still in times of drought. But we're going to look at Elijah's life, and we're going to see yet again, as we've seen previously, how the word of the Lord, how what God says is what we rest in, what we take as truth, even in times of despair. So this morning we're going to be in the desert again. And the desert in times of despair is the title of the message, The Desert in Times of Despair. And we'll be in 1 Kings chapter 19, but I want to start with a story. Horatio G. Spafford, a successful lawyer, businessman in Chicago, with a lovely family, a wife, Anna, and 5 children. However, they were not strangers to tears and tragedy. Their young son died with pneumonia in 1871. That same year, much of their business was lost in the Great Chicago Fire. Yet God in His mercy and kindness allowed the business to flourish once more. But then in November 21st, 1873, the French ocean liner set sail, crossing the Atlantic from U.S. to Europe with 313 passengers on board. Among those passengers was Mrs. Spafford and their 4 daughters. Although Mr. Spafford had planned to go with his family, he found it necessary to stay in Chicago to help solve an unexplained or unexpected business problem. He told his wife he would join her and their children in Europe a few days later. His plan was to take another ship. About 4 days into the journey, that ship collided with a powerful iron-hulled Scottish ship. Suddenly, all those on board were in grave danger. Anna hurriedly brought her 4 children to the deck. She knelt there with Annie, Margaret Lee, Bessie, and Tanita, and prayed that God would spare them if it could be His will, or to make them willing to endure whatever awaited. So what was she asking for right there? She was asking, in a sense, what we'd call a miracle, right? Great act of God. Here the ship is going down. There's no good solution when you're in the middle of the ocean, right? And there's a hole in the ship. God, we need something miraculous. But what happened? Within approximately 12 minutes, the ship slipped beneath the dark waters of the Atlantic, carrying with it 226 of the 313 passengers, including the 4 Spafford children. A sailor, rowing a small boat over the spot where the ship went down, spotted a woman floating on a piece of wreckage. It was none other than the mother, Anna, who was still alive. He pulled her into his boat, and they were picked up by another large vessel, which 9 days later landed them finally in Wales, in Europe on the other side. From there, she was able to wire her husband a telegram, which began, "Saved alone, what shall I do?" Mr. Spafford later framed that telegram and placed it in his office. Another of the ship's survivors, Pastor Wes, later recalled Anna saying, "God gave me 4 daughters. Now they have been taken from me, someday I will understand why. And some of you have been there too, right? Great tragedy. And what is the question so often that we ask? Why? Yeah. Mr. Spafford booked a passage on the next available ship and left to join his grieving wife. With the ship about 4 days out, the captain called Spafford to his cabin and told them that they were now over the place where his children had gone down. According to his daughter, one that was born after the tragedy, Spafford wrote, "It is well with my soul." Well, on this journey, it's the hymn that you know well. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. Anna gave birth to 3 more children. One of those, again, died at the age of 4 with the pneumonia again. In August 1881, the Spaffords moved to Jerusalem. Mr. Spafford died and is buried in that city. So you look at a story like this and you see great tragedy, you see a great cry for God to do something miraculous, and yet you see God also say, "No, I'm going to take your children." So what do we do in times even of death, of despair, of discouragement? It's so easy to focus on those people, those circumstances, those times, and say, why? Why, God? Well, today in our passage, we're going to see despair in the desert, and we're going to see Elijah, the man of God, right? The great prophet, the one who has done amazing and seen God do amazing things. And yet he's going to ask the why question. But God's going to ask a question of him, actually twice. He's going to reiterate it. And it's going to come down to not the why, because we don't get the answer to the why all the time. In fact, a lot of times I would say we don't. But it's going to come down to both, again, the Word of God, what are we going to believe, what are we going to rest in, and the work of God. Because God is at work, even in the midst of tragedy. It was just a few short chapters ago, back in chapter 17, that Elijah burst onto the scene. Here we are in chapter 19, so it's just 2 chapters ago, and we really get the whole life story. There's a little bit more of Elijah in 2 Kings, but this is all we get really in 1 Kings, chapters 17, 18, and 19. And several months ago, we looked at chapter 17, and we saw God bring this man named Elijah kind of out of the middle of nowhere, and he bursts onto the scene as a great prophet of God, and he does something really amazing. He comes and he says there's going to be no rain. Remember? No rain for the span until I say that it will rain. And this was in direct contradiction to who? It was in direct contradiction to Ahab, the king at the time, but not just Ahab, Ahab's rotten stinking wife, Jezebel. And what was Jezebel known for? Well, Jezebel was an outsider that Ahab had brought in, a no-no for a king of Israel. But Ahab brought with her her god, her false god Baal. Her false god Baal that was supposed to be the king of the harvest and of the rain. And here Elijah bursts onto the scene and said, no, it's actually not going to rain. The true God is greater than your false god. But again, what happens when it doesn't rain? What happens when it doesn't rain even on God's own people? Well, it all turns into a desert. And here, Elijah, he sees some miraculous things happen. Remember, there's the widow, there's the raven, there's the brook. All of that happens where God gives them the unlimited supply, all-you-can-eat breadsticks, right? Except it's not at your favorite restaurant. It's just a jar of oil, a jar of flour. That's it. And then God miraculously provides ravens bringing him food every day. Okay? He got Uber Eats before it was popular. Birds flying it in, drones, They had it all the way back then. Nothing new under the sun. eventually, what happens? The brook dries up. He has to go find other source. And then finally, God sends rain. And then we learn a little bit about Obadiah and Ahab. Obadiah was just Ahab's father in all of this in chapter 18. And we learn that Ahab came from a really bad line. Like, it said his grandfather was like the worst king ever. Then it said his father was the worst king ever. And Ahab, not to be outdone, said, I'm going to be the worst king ever too, right? And just making Israel sin and disobey God and go against it. And it got so bad that, Baal and the worship of Baal had spread all throughout. And so then we get this great standoff between the prophet of God and all these false prophets of Baal. The story on Mount Carmel. You've heard it in your Sunday school class, right? The two altars that were built, and Elijah said, call on your God and see if he can bring down fire to consume it. And remember, there's like 450 prophets, and they're screaming and yelling for their God to bring down this fire. And Elijah's just mocking them. He said, maybe your God's sleeping. Maybe he's on vacation. Maybe he's taking a trip. And the fire never comes. And then it's Elijah's turn. 1 against 450, this great standoff, right? And what does Elijah do? Well, he has the altar built, 12 stones there. He puts the meat upon it. But then he brings gallons, jugs, and jugs of water. Now, I don't know about you, but when you want to start a fire, I don't usually start by pouring water all over it, right? And yet he does that, and it's just a simple prayer, and he's on top of the mountain, on top of Mount Carmel, and what do they experience? They experience the awesome and mighty power of God. And it's visible in front of all of the prophets. It's visible in front of the people of Israel. The fire comes down from heaven. It consumes the meat. It consumes the stones. It consumes the water. Miraculous. That's what I want. That's what we call a mountaintop experience right there, right? And he says, okay, Israel, whose side are you going to be on? Because the winner right here is really clear. God's word is going to prevail. God's purposes are going to prevail. And then they go and they knock out, literally, all of the prophets of Baal. So he's on the mountaintop. And then finally, at the end of chapter 18, Elijah then prays again. There's some back and forth. But the drought on the land is finally over because he prays for rain, and the rain finally comes. All of these amazing, big, spectacular moments in Elijah's life. I don't know about you, but it sounds really exhausting. Okay, you have to fend off or compete with 450 false prophets. You have to pray for the rain to stop and for the rain to start. Okay, and it actually does. I mean, these are just great, big, miraculous wonders of God. Not to mention the widow's son raised from the dead. All of these things. And then we come to chapter 19. And this is right after that. And what happens? Man's message comes to Elijah, or a woman specifically, Jezebel, and man's message brings despair. Even after this mountaintop experience, look at verse 1 of chapter 19, where it says, and Ahab, wicked old king, told Jezebel, his stinky wife, that all that Elijah had done, and withal how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. Remember, this is her god Baal. These are her prophets. This is her religion that she's brought in from outside into Israel. And Ahab has the great pleasure, the privilege, not really. I think I would be scared and timid if I were Ahab here. And you're having go to your wife Jezebel and say, guess what, honey? They're all dead. It's all gone. So what was Jezebel's response? Well, she's a woman with a plan and a woman with a message. And that's what we're looking at here. Man's message brings to despair. This will be verses 1 through 8. And we see, first of all, the bad message, or man's message. Look at verse 2. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah. Who is Elijah again? Simply, he is a messenger. He's a messenger as well. He's a prophet for God. He's both forthtelling and foretelling, but he's showing, he's giving the message from the one true God, Yahweh. In fact, his name means that Yahweh is my God, as opposed to all the other people who are saying Baal is my God, right? And so Jezebel sends a messenger saying, and here's the message. It's a great message. So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. What's the message? You got 24 hours. And in 24 hours, here's what's going to happen. You're going to be dead. That's what I'm promising you. And in fact, if I don't accomplish that purpose of killing you, Jezebel says, then may my life be taken just like you took my prophet's life. Now, does this sound like a woman that has a mission statement? Is she on a mission? Does this sound like a woman who knows what her life and her mind is about? In other words, is she driven? Is she purposeful? Does she know what the task at hand is? In her mind, yes, yes, and yes. And what is that? Well, Baal's my God. You've profaned him. I'm going to get you back. You got 24 hours. So the clock starts ticking, right? What a great time to be alive. You have 24 hours to live, and the whole kingdom's coming after you. Or at least Jezebel and her goons, right? One of us is going to die, is the message. One of us, and it's going to be you. How would you respond then to a message like that? Put yourself in Elijah's shoes. Get a knock on the door. Could be a police officer, whoever. And they're just saying, the government wants you dead. You got 24 hours. That's just the messenger, okay? There's still a lot of resources you could put behind that. But what happens? What's the reaction? And here's the reaction in verse 3. And think of your own reaction, because it's very easy to react this way. Even if you're Elijah, even if you're a man of God, even if Yahweh is my God, even if you've been on the mountaintop and seen God do great things, notice the reaction. It's a reaction of fear and flight. Verse 3, and when he, that is Elijah, saw that, he arose and went for his life. What does it mean to go went for your life? It means to run for your life, right? And he came to Beersheba, which belongeth to Judah, and left his servant there. What is he doing? What's his reaction? Well, it's one of fear. Do the circumstances of life ever cause fear in your heart? In other words, you get the bad news, you get the bad message, and the immediate response is fear. And what does fear cause you to do? Is fear a controlling emotion? Very. I would say it's not the best motivation, but it's a very powerful motivation, right? In other words, people will do things that you never thought they would do just out of fear, right? And it can be as simple as a child fearing punishment, right? That if you don't stop doing that, I'm going to deal with you swiftly. And the fear, which hopefully is out of a heart of love as a parent, motivates the child to obey. But even with adults, fear causes us to do all sorts of things. You only have to look at the last 2 years, right? Who knew you needed to stock up on toilet paper? Who knew, right? But fear causes you to do very specific things, right? It motivates people into action. And so fear really came over Elijah so that he's running for his life. It's not just the fear, it's the desire to get away, out from under the pressure, out from under all the stress, out from under the danger that he felt. Is that how we handle things? Well, often I would say, if there's pressure or turmoil or bad news that comes in our life, don't we often, we fear what's going to happen, but we also just want to get out away from under it. If we just get away from it, right? If we could just get away, wouldn't that just solve all your problems? If you could just get away from all the annoying people in life, right? Or if you could just get away from all the trouble of the workplace. Or if you could just get away from your house just for a bit, if I could just run away. I think we've all had those thoughts if we're honest, right? Because we don't like dealing with the pressure in the moment. You want to get out of the pressure cooker. Notice where, though, Elijah ran to. Rain had already come, but then he comes to Beersheba, with belongings to Judah. Where is that? Well, Beersheba is actually all the way in the south. And it's really as far south as you can go in Judah. And it's right on the line, again, of where the agriculture, and guess what was on the other side? The desert. The desert was. So he's come full circle now, right? He's been in the desert several times, both out in Zidon and in the wilderness with the ravens and all of this. He's been all the way up to the mountaintop, top of Mount Carmel, and now he's fled all the way back again. And where is he yet again? Well, verse 4 says he leaves a servant in Beersheba, really on the national line of Judah. And now he's going to continue to flee out into the wilderness. He's back in the desert, verses 4 and 5. Look at verse 4. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and he came and sat down under a juniper tree. And he requested for himself that he might die. What's his response in this? I'm going to go out in the middle of the desert, and I'm going to find a juniper tree or a broom tree. And what are these? It's really just those skinny little tree shrubs out in the middle of the desert, but then they flow over and they have a lot of twigs and a lot of little leaves. And you're wondering, how in the world does this thing even survive in the middle of the desert? But what does it give? It gives a little bit of shade in the middle of all this barren wilderness. So it's this little tree that he just puts himself under. And what is his one request? I have one wish, I have one desire. I just want it to end. And what's the only way that he sees that it can end? I just want to die. In other words, we would have all sorts of psychological descriptions for this today, right? Suicidal tendencies, depressed, it goes into all of those. But the Bible just simply states how it is. It's a real human emotion, it's a real human struggle that I think, if we're honest, we've all dealt with it at some time. And why is that? Because we live in a broken world. Have you noticed? This world ain't perfect. It's cursed. There's a lot of things that are messed up. And so these thoughts even can come across our minds. I just want it to be over. And it's not even the thought of I'm going to take my own life. It's just, it's more of a soft way of putting it, right? If I were to die, I wouldn't put up a fight. Now notice the irony in all of this. Where is Elijah right now? He's as far away from Jezebel as he can possibly get. What has Jezebel promised him, though? Well, if you look at what he just requested, Jezebel promised that she would kill him. Yeah. So if he was really saying, I want, why not just go to Jezebel, right? I'm halfway joking here, but you realize that in the midst of all this, it's just utter despair is where he's at. He's at the bottom now, and you thought we've gotten there before with the desert before, but now he's just saying, I want to die. And why does he want to die? Well, look back at verse 4. He says that he might die, and said, it is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. What does he mean by it is enough? He's really just saying it's too much. It's too great. The burden, the weight that I'm having to bear, to carry right now, it's just too much. Have you ever been there? Some of you may be there right now with what you're dealing with. And it feels like that. Lord, it's just too much. I just want it to end. It's enough. But notice, he's still looking to God. He's like, I'm not going to take it, because he realizes, okay, the Lord holds it in his hand. So he actually prays this prayer. Now, O Lord, take my life, for I'm not better than my fathers. What is he saying? He has an impending doom sense, but what is he feeling or thinking? He's realizing his own inadequacy. Because when he says, I'm not better than my fathers, what is he saying? They're all dead. They went before me. I'm no better than them. Lord, just take me now too. In other words, Elijah is saying, my work here is done. I don't see any more thing for me to do here on this earth. I'm no better than the ones that are already dead, my fathers before me. In other words, Lord, I don't see what use you have for me anymore. That's the feeling that he has. Lord, you have no more use for me, so just take me. Be done with me. Now, is that a right view? Well, we'll look at it in a little bit. But that is what he is feeling at this time. It's too much. Lord, you're done with me. Just take me now. But what does God do? Well, what do we do with even grumpy little kids? You need a nap. Do you know that sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is sleep? And I believe that. It's true. Because I know I need my sleep. And if I don't have my sleep, does it not affect so many things? And when you're in the pressure cooker, you don't really get that much sleep. Sometimes the option's not afforded to you. In other words, you're having to deal with all the junk, all the stuff, all the things that are going on. And then when you finally do get to bed, you know how it is. Your heart races, your mind races. It's hard to get to sleep. But what is needed? Well, in a broken world where God has made us with physical bodies that are slowly decaying, you need sleep. And that's what God was able to give his messenger. So then it focuses in right on Elijah, specifically, God's messenger, in verses 5 through 8. Look at verse 5. And as he lay and slept under a juniper tree, behold, an angel touched him and said unto him, Arise and eat. What did God send? He sent an angel. What is an angel? It's a messenger. Here's the message from God, though. So he already got the messenger from Jezebel, right? What was Jezebel's message? You or me, buddy, but it's going to be you, 24 hours, right? What's God's message? Take a nap, eat some food. Just dealing with the basic physical sustenance. In other words, it's really at this point, you just need to get by and do the next one right thing, right? In the midst of all the burdens and all the weight and the pressure cooker, what is God saying? Just do the next right thing. In other words, you don't have to worry about all these grand and great plans. You just need to sleep and eat, okay? Just do the next right thing. And what did God send him? He sent him a messenger. He sent him his word, an angel, but sent him his word. And notice, it was nothing miraculous here. Nothing miraculous here is happening except an angel shows up, but all the angel is doing is giving him food and getting him to sleep. That's it. So, verse 6, Elijah looked, and behold, there was a cake baking on the coals and a cruse of water at his head. Praise the Lord. Don't you wish you could have breakfast in bed sometimes too? You wake up, and there's the pancakes, and there's the cruse of water, and he did eat and drink, and what's the next step? He lay down again. He went right back to sleep. Took another nap. Sometimes that's what's needed, right? Verse 7, 2 times, again, second time. There's a reason this happens twice. God is trying to show and emphasize his care for his prophet. And again, the angel, the messenger of the Lord, came again a second time, touched him, woke him up, and said, Arise and eat. Why? He gives a reason now. He doesn't say why it's all happening. He's just saying you need to prepare because the journey is too what? Great for thee. What was Elijah saying when he wanted to die? Lord, just take me now. It is, he uses the word enough, but it's that same word, that same idea. It is too great. And what is God saying here? Get your rest, get your food. There's still a journey ahead. Yes, it is too great for you. In other words, God realizes the great weight that is upon even his people in the times of despair. God knows it. He understands it. He sees it. He's not oblivious to it. So he's saying it's just the next right thing, as simple as eating and getting your sleep, but that there still is a journey for you. And what is he saying there? Well, that directly contrasts what Elijah said at the end of verse 4. I'm not better than my fathers. Just take me now. I'm as good as dead. I have nothing more left. But what is God saying? There's still a journey, right? You're still here. There's still a path ahead for you. Get your rest. Get your food. We're going to take the next right step. So what happens? Verse 8, we see the new mountain that he's supposed to go to. Verse 8, and he arose and did eat and drink and went in the strength of that meat or meal 40 days and 40 nights unto Horeb, the mount of God. What is he supposed to do? Well, remember, he fled here to the very edge of Judah, as far away from Jezebel as he could get, out in the middle of the wilderness, just trying to get away from her. But God says, no, I still have a journey for you, a journey to go on, and it's a journey to the Mount of God. And here is the strength that you need to get there. Here's the food and the drink that will get you there. But yet it's a journey. It's going to take you 40 days and 40 nights. And why would it take that long? Well, it's over 250 miles, and he's walking. So imagine if you've ever driven up to Stanley, Idaho. That's only about 140 miles from here. Take out the roads. You got all the mountains. You got to hike out there. Now, some of you could do it, and you could do it in less than 40 days. Some of us could not do it, and we would rather die, right? And that's not even the full way, but it's through mountainous desert terrain, and he's going to where? He's going to Mount Horeb. Where is this? This is the same Mount Sinai. What's Mount Sinai? Well, there's so much history there. This is where God came down to Moses, gave the law, all of these great things. Israelites at the foot of the mountain, and what were they worshiping? Golden calf. That was also what Baal was depicted at often as a bull. And here, so see the topography, if you will, of Elijah's journey so far. He comes out of the middle of nowhere, goes into the desert because he said no. He goes out to Zidon, outside, and then he goes all the way up to the Mount Carmel and has this great miraculous experience where fire from heaven comes down. But now he's run all the way back out to the desert again, trying to get away from Jezebel. But God says, no, you're coming back to the Mount of God, Mount Sinai, where I gave my word, where I gave my law. That's where you're supposed to go. And it's a long journey. It's going to take a while to get there. So here's the substance to do that. You have a journey. You have the next right thing you're supposed to do. Notice the end of verse 7. Now we look, because the journey is too great. You're saying what you're dealing with is too much. I'm saying what lies ahead of you is too much. But you need to believe my messenger, not the messenger of Jezebel. So here are these contrasts that are set up now. You have Jezebel's messenger and the angel of God, God's messenger. You have Mount Carmel, and now we're going to look at what happens on Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb and how God interacts. So we've seen in these first 8 verses that man's message brings despair. But in verses 9 through 18 now, we'll see God's message brings a quiet hope, a steadfast hope. And it's nothing big or grand that brings that, we'll see. So Elijah then goes on this 40-day trek, and he finally comes to a cave, we'll see. Verse 9, and he came thither into a cave and lodged there, And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, and said unto him, What doest thou here, Elijah? So what does God do in his mercy and his grace? He brings Elijah on this journey, sets him right in a cave. And what is a cave? My family and I were able to go up to Table Rock yesterday that overlooks the entire valley. It was windy up there, very windy. The wind doesn't have anything to stop it up there. But it's a beautiful view of the whole Treasure Valley, and you can see everything up there. But under Table Rock, if you crawl around just a little bit under, there's actually some caves that both people and nature have carved out, and of course spray painted everywhere too. But they're still cool. And what happens when you go into a cave? Well, it's cool. It protects you from all that wind, right? And it gives at least somewhat a feeling of safety and security. In fact, God is often mentioned throughout the Psalms as our rock, our refuge, something that is strong and secure that keeps us. And so here Elijah is at Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb, in this cave, and the word of the Lord comes unto him. Another message from God, and God simply does this. In the midst of Elijah's despair going through this journey, God asks this question. And this is a question he's going to ask 2 times, but he's asking this question, What doest thou here, Elijah? Now, it seems kind of like a weird question. Like, God, you just told me to go on this journey, right? You told me to go here. Why are you asking me why I'm here? You're the one that brought me over here, right? You're the one that put me on this journey. And so the question is not, does God know what Elijah's doing? Of course God knows. God knows why he's here. What is God doing? He's wanting Elijah to ask himself that question. Elijah, why do you think, or what in your mind, why are you here? And we'll come back to that question, but it's a very foundational question that we can ask of ourselves even today. Why are you here? You say, Pastor Phill, what do you mean? Well, it could be, why are you here at church? Or why are you even listening to me? Why are you listening to this weird guy dressed in a suit preaching from this really old book as you sit in these comfortable chairs? Why are you even here, right? But it's also a much deeper question of why are you here in life? In other words, what is your purpose? What is your motivation? What are you doing with the life that God has given you, and even in the midst of despair? God sent him, but does Elijah know why he's there? And then Elijah answers in a way that is really just saying, God, you should know why I'm here. It's a plea. It's almost a cry of desperation. Look at verse 10. And Elijah said, I have been very jealous for the Lord God of hosts. For the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, and slain thy prophets with the sword. And I, even I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away. What is it? God, I'm the only one left. Everyone hates me. Everyone's out to get me. Everyone's going to kill me. We may use the word victim mentality in this in our current vernacular, but that's the idea behind it. God, I've done everything for you is the idea, and you've done nothing for me, okay? That's really what it comes down to. So why am I here? I'm here because I did what you told me to do, and look where it put me, is almost the feeling. And we can get that way with God sometimes too. Lord, have I not served you? Have I not obeyed you? Have I done what you told me to? And yet, my life's not all roses and unicorns and rainbows. And that's important to understand. It's important for young people even to understand right now. Here we don't preach a prosperity gospel. Just believe in Jesus and all your problems will go away. And why don't we preach that? Well, first of all, it's not found in the Bible. Second of all, not only is it not found in the Bible, it's going to lead people very astray. It's going to take people away from God. Because if you believe that, you haven't faced reality, okay? You haven't faced the reality of the curse that is upon the world, the brokenness that is in this world. So God, I'm on your side. And then notice how he ends with this desperation. I'm the only one left. Now, is that true? No, but to Elijah, did it feel true? Well, it felt true. But just because you think something's true, as Pastor Jeff often says, doesn't make it so. In other words, we have to be reminded with the truth of who God is and what his word says, because so often our emotions, our circumstances, our mind will lead us astray. To God, I'm the only one that even cares about you, even though it wasn't true. But he felt hopeless. He felt alone. So what did God do? Well, God showed his power. Has Elijah seen his power before? Yeah, but he shows it again. Look at verse 11. And he said, that is God, said, go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord. So go out, stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. What happened? A great whirlwind. A great show of power and might and strength. The rocks are being ripped up, thrown everywhere. And yet that's not where God is. In other words, it's not in this great grand power that you always have to see God. God says, I'm not in the whirlwind. Well, then what happens next? The middle of verse 11. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. What's an earthquake? The whole ground shaking. We've had that here. I've had my first experience with earthquakes here in Idaho. Even the tip of some of the mountains in Stanley fell off during one of our last earthquakes. I was in Brady's rental house when one of them happened, and he called me right afterwards to make sure it was still standing. And it was, thankfully. Nothing wrong had happened, but it felt like the whole house was just on the ocean, swaying. Earthquakes are unnerving, right? They're powerful. You don't know how to deal with them, and yet the Lord was not in the earthquake. And then what happens? Fire. After the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. Well, Elijah had already seen fire, right? Top of Mount Carmel, the fire came down, consumed everything. The Lord was in that one, but this one, great display of strength, he's not in the fire. And after the fire, into verse 12, a still, small voice. God simply whispering. What is God saying here? Does God have control over the wind? Yeah. Does he have control over his creation, the very rocks? Of course. Does God have control over fire and all the elements that even hold this world together? Yes, and it's God's great miraculous power, but God is saying, how I'm revealing myself to you now is you don't need to have these great, miraculous, powerful things happening all the time. I'm still here when it's just a quiet whisper, a small voice. So what does Elijah do? Verse 13, his response to God's whisper. And it was so when Elijah heard it that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entering of the cave. Now what happened here? We were never told that Elijah actually went out like God asked him to. It could have been that Elijah went out, he saw the whirlwind and ran right back into the cave. That's what I would have done, right? But it may have been he just sat there the whole time and heard and saw the opening of the cave, all the rumbling and the ruckus. But it was a quiet, small voice. And Elijah, he wrapped his face. Was that because of his own ashamedness or embarrassment? Or just because he didn't want to listen? I don't know. But he comes finally, though, to the entrance of the cave. And there came a voice to him and said, and it's the same question again, now the second time, what doest thou here, Elijah? God asks him again. Does that mean he got the answer wrong the first time? Most likely. He's giving him another chance, but Elijah is still not quite getting it because he says again the very thing he said back in verse 10. Look at verse 14. And Elijah said, I have been very jealous for the Lord of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thy altars, slain thy prophets with the sword, and I even only am left. And they seek my life to take it away. God, that's why I'm here. I'm trying to run away from the people who are trying to kill me because I've served you. Verse 15. The Lord said unto him, go, return on thy way to the wilderness. Why is God asking this question? why are you here? He's asking it because it's a piercing question. It's a question of motivation. It's a question of purpose. It's a question of what are you living for? Or we could rephrase it this way: who are you living for? Because it's so easy to live for the word of those around us. What everyone else is saying, that's what I'm going to believe, that's what I'm going to live in fear of, that's what's going to motivate my actions in life. What I'm hearing on the news, that's what's going to drive me. Or what the circumstances of life, the trials of life, that's what's going to control my life. But God is saying, no, what are you really living for? What are you really doing here? What is your purpose here? Because if you're still drawing breath and you know the Lord as your Savior, He still has a journey, He still has a purpose, there's still a plan and a place for you. So He asks the same question of you and me: why are you even here? Why are you even living? Why are you still alive? And the question is supposed to be to do the will and the work and follow the words of God, not my own. And notice that's exactly what God does. He says, your work is not done. My work is not done for you. And that's what verse 15 continues on. He's saying, Elijah, there's still work for you to do. There's still a plan for you. There's still things, you're still alive. There's still things that you have to do. Middle of verse 15, go return to the wilderness of Damascus. You get to go on another journey again, but it's up north now. And when thou comest, anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. Verse 16, and Jehu the son of Nimshi shall thou anoint be king over Israel. And Elisha the son of Shaphat the Abimelech shall thou anoint to be prophet in thy room. What is God saying to him? He's saying, go anoint new kings over these areas. In other words, we're going to clean out all the political crud, all the political waste of Ahab and Jezebel, and there's going to be new kings who come. And what does Jehu do? Well, that's the exciting story where he rides into Jerusalem. He calls up to Jezebel's window and says, if anyone's on the Lord's side, throw the woman out. And they do. They just push her out the window, and she gets eaten by dogs. That's Jehu, and then he becomes the next king, taking out Ahab and Jezebel and their whole family that had forsaken and disobeyed God. What is God doing? God is big enough to clean up all the mess, in other words, that has happened. God is powerful enough to set up the rulers and the leaders to take care of the mess that we make, of our own making. It's not God's making. But not only the political mess, it's also the religious and spiritual mess. Because you see, there's a successor in Elisha that he's supposed to anoint to be prophet in thy stead, or in thy room. So God says, not only am I going to clean up all the political stuff, I'm going to clean up the religious stuff. Elijah, you're not alone. Not only you're not alone, you have a successor. There's other people who are going to follow you and lead in right ways, in spiritually right ways. In other words, God is saying, my work is not done here. Even though it looks really bad, even though things are falling apart, God says there's still a purpose and a plan. My work is not done. So part of the question of why are you here right now? Well, we are here right now because God still has a work and a purpose that He wants us to do that we should be all about. Because we don't know how much time we have. We don't know when He's coming back. We don't know how long our life is. And yet God has a purpose and a work. And then what does God promise? Verse 17 and 18, God promises sure and certain judgment for the wicked. In other words, what Elijah has been running away from the whole time, God says, I got that covered, okay? In other words, don't worry about it. Judgment's coming. I'm going to take care of that. There's no need to worry about that. Verse 17, it shall come to pass that him that escapeth the sword of Hazael shall Jehu slay, and him that escapeth the sword of Jehu shall Elisha slay. Yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth which hath not kissed him. What is he saying? I'm going to judge the wicked, and there's still people that are on my side. You're not the only one, Elijah. What is God giving him? He's giving him confidence and hope. Here's how we often look at it. Lord, I want my problem solved now. I want justice to be done now. I want you to take care of all the problems now. But God's not that small. And what I mean by that is God is big enough, he's over all, he's outside of time, that he can take care of all the problems and all the issues and even all the hurts. And he says, don't worry, I'm going to take care of it. It's just not on our timetable. Just not on our timeline. But it's going to happen. So how does God speak today? Well, he speaks through his creation, right? You can look around and say, yes, there is a God. It's evident through creation. But God also speaks quietly through his word, even in the times of despair, that he gives hope. Just because you don't see a great big answer to prayer does not mean that God is distant or that he's not working. How do we know that? Simply because his word is always true. Remember what God told to Zerubbabel through Zechariah? It's not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit, saith the Lord. God's spirit is still at work, if you are a believer, in your heart, even right now, to comfort you, to guide you into truth. That's what Christ has said of the Spirit. And if you're not saved, the Spirit has come to convict or to convince you that you are a sinner in need of a Savior. And how does that work? Well, there are miraculous things, but it's really just the simple, everyday, believing, trusting, following the Spirit. Nothing miraculous. And God also speaks through Jesus himself, which is revealed in the Word. You think of Hebrews chapter 1, where in times past, God was revealed in the prophets and all of that, but in today, he has spoken through his Son, through Jesus, so that we can know him. And that's what saith the Lord of hosts. So God's message doesn't have to be great and powerful and grand. It can just be quiet and honest and truthful because of who God is, and we can simply rest in that. So we've seen man's message brings despair. God's message brings quiet hope. And then finally, as we close, God's work is continuing. In other words, God's not done yet. God's not done with you. How do I know that? You're still alive. God's not done with this world. How do I know that? He hasn't come back yet. It's very clear. It's very simple. God's work is still continuing. But notice how he shows that in verses 19 through 21. Look at verse 19, if you would, with me. It says, so he, that is Elijah, departed thence and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he with the 12th. And Elijah passed by him and cast his mantle upon him. Now, I don't know exactly how this exchange was, but seeing some of Elijah's attitude, it may have been he just ran up and said, here, you take this, right? You get this mantle now. But God had someone in place to continue to lead the people spiritually. He wasn't going to leave them without a spiritual leader. And he used Elijah in a great way, and now he was going to use Elisha. And what was Elisha's response? Well, it was actually one of exuberance and ready to take the torch and ready to go forward for God. And how do I know that? Well, look at verse 20. It says, Elisha left the oxen and ran after Elijah. And he said, let me, I pray thee, kiss my father and mother, and then I will follow thee. And he said unto him, go back again, for what have I done to thee? In other words, go do it. That's fine. Leave your oxen. Go say goodbye to your mother and your father. Go kiss them goodbye. And this is the same word that is just used of all those who kissed Baal, showing an allegiance to Baal, but now he's saying, I'm going to kiss my parents goodbye in the sense of my allegiance to God and what he has called me to. Going to go forward in verse 21. And then he returned back from him and took the yoke of oxen and slew them and boiled their flesh with the instruments of the oxen and gave them unto people, and they did eat. What did he just do? He burned down his business. That's what he did. Here he is, a farmer, 12 yoke of oxen. This was his livelihood. And he just killed them all and fed them to people. I don't know about you, but dead oxen don't do much field work, okay? He's leaving behind his business as well. So what is Elisha showing? Well, remember what Elijah said. It's kind of the pessimistic view. Nobody else cares about God. I've done everything for God. There's no one else to serve him. God, you're done with me. But God is saying, no, that's not true. There are still many who have not bowed to me. There's still work to be done. And here the next generation is coming saying, Lord, we want to do that work. We're going to leave behind family. We're going to leave behind our job. We're going to go forward for what God has for us. And that's how the chapter ends. And really the story of Elijah at this point ends. And he went after Elijah, that is, Elisha went after Elijah and ministered unto him. Elijah's name means Yahweh or Jehovah is my God. Elisha's name means God saves. What's happening here? God's work is continuing. It's going on. So here's the question, or questions. Are you in a time of despair? Have you dealt with despair? Do you think you'll deal with despair again? Well, if you're living this life, there's plenty of things to be disparaged over, right? Notice what happens when you listen to man's message. I'm going to kill you. Okay, I just want to die. It's not bringing much hope, is it? Notice, though, how God reveals himself. Not in great and grand ways. It's simply through a quiet whisper. Believe, trust, follow my word. There's still a purpose I have for you. There's still a plan. There's still a journey. And then see that God is still at work. He still has things for you to do, for me to do, for others to do, for his glory. So let's follow after him. May the Lord give us his grace to do that.